Thank you again for coming. My name is Michael Kennedy. I'm an instructor at Developmentor,
Yes.
and our topic for today is building rich input forms with ASP.NET MVC. Here's my Twitter and my website, which has email and other ways to contact me if you like. Also, if you follow me on Twitter, check out the website. I'll send out the code samples, and as well as we'll post those on develop.com a little bit later. I guess one final thing is we are recording this video. Periodically, people ask if there's some sort of recording that they could share with their colleagues or whatever. So yeah, there will be a recording, and we'll make that available a day or two afterwards. It takes a little while to process everything. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, our topic is building rich forms with ASP.NET MVC. Now, if you guys have some experience with MVC, there's quite a few moving parts. You've got to learn, what constitutes a model, what are the views, how do controllers fit into there, routing, razor syntax, strongly typed views, all these different types of things. But one of the real big stumbling blocks I think that people run into is when you have to take user input, when you've got to do more interesting interactions rather than just making a request to a controller, pulling up some data, and just showing it on the screen. People get that pretty quickly, but it's this interaction that can be pretty tricky. So we're going to kind of span the whole gamut of types of interactions that you can build for users. In the beginning, we'll just have like some simple input forms where people can just, post some data. Then we'll layer on validation. We'll layer on more complex data. And by the end, we're going to be looking at this concept of view models, and we're also going to probably, provided we have time left, build some client-side sort of interactions where it's a regular HTML form, but rather than just having postbacks, always going back to the server, do almost all the work on the client side and build some services in MVC, sort of a precursor to the ASP.NET web API that's coming out in the next version of MVC and .NET. Okay, so this talk is not going to be a lot about slides. Slides are all well and good, but really what I wanted to do with you all today is just sit down and build a website sort of from end to end. And we're going to start with something of a pre-built website, but we're going to build a lot of the pieces from scratch. And I think that's really the only way to learn this. So we won't have too many slides. We'll just be mostly doing demos. But there's one main concept that I want to introduce. And so here's the agenda. If you look at the various .NET web platforms, you've got regular ASP.NET, which typically these days is called ASP.NET Web Forms or Classic ASP.NET, and we've got MVC, and then you've got other things you can do with like HTTP handlers and whatnot. In MVC, one of the really shining points, the really powerful things that they got right in MVC is how do you build input forms, and how do you, sorry, there's a siren going past. How do you build forms, and how do you bind that back to your models? Okay, so in traditional web forms, it was super painful. You'd have to drop all these text boxes and things on your page, and then you have to copy the value from each text box into each field. We'll see that there's this combination of features called HTML helpers and model binding that basically let us just go, this form has this class, Shazam, the pieces fit together. On top of that, once we have these classes, we can teach the classes what requirements they have. We can use this concept called unobtrusive validation. The unobtrusive part just means it will work on the server side if, say, JavaScript is turned off or the client doesn't support some sort of complex JavaScript validation. But if you have a rich client like a desktop browser, iPad browser, most phones even these days, it'll actually run the validation on the client side as well as the server side. So we'll see MVC has this cool unified client-server validation model. We teach our models how to, what the requirements are, and for the most part, those are surfaced both to the client and server. And then, while it's possible to take basic models like say entity framework models or other types of models and use those in our forms, we'll see that most of the time that sort of falls apart pretty quickly. Not always, but most of the time. And so we're going to come up with this concept called view models. And these are models that are specifically built for a particular view. They're somewhat similar, but really not the same thing as view models in the WPF Silverlight world of MVVM, but kind of like that. They just don't have as many smarts. And because MVC lets us create clean, nice HTML, it's a very JavaScript-friendly environment. That means it's easy for us to do JavaScript in our forms, and we're going to do that in the end. We'll build some interesting stuff there. The sort of pinnacle of building rich client-side applications, web applications, is this concept that's coming out in .NET 4, sorry, 4.5, MVC 4, called single-page applications. And we'll just, I'll give you some pointers on that, just a little bit of background, but that's sort of a pretty serious topic, so we won't cover that in much depth. Okay. So like I said, make way for the demos. We don't want to do too many slides, but there's one general concept that you guys are going to have to, you'll see emerge all the time in these MVC applications. When you're working with forms, there's usually some sort of GET request that actually loads up the form, and then there's some sort of locally filling out the form, the user's typing it in, and then they post back those changes. And rather than just redisplaying what the post is, usually you'll be sent off to another section of the site. So I refer to that as the get post redirect pattern. And typically that's broken into several different action methods on the controllers, as we'll see. Okay, so here maybe we're editing a book with an ID 42, so we get that, we make some changes, we post the changes back to the server. Rather than just showing us the result, it actually sends us over to like the read-only view of that book, show/42. Now that's all well and good in sort of a diagram, but this is how it looks in code. Like I said, it's usually broken into two pieces. So sorry if the fonts are kind of small, but here we've got an add book that just takes the ID, that would be the 42, and it has a HTTP GET. So this method will only respond to GET requests, right? This is the one that sort of fills out the view-only data and returns it back. The user edits that in their browser, they post it back. Whoops. They post it back, and then this method with the HTTP post will run, and we're actually passing the rich object here rather than just the ID. We're doing some work on it, maybe copying the values out of there, saving it, and then finally, if everything works good, we redirect them off to their own place. Okay, let me just check for questions, see if you guys have any. No, none yet? Okay. Mary, everything sounding okay out there? All right, she'll let me know. All right, thanks. Okay, good. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, like I said, we're going to build this application kind of end to end. And I came up with this sort of silly bookstore example. We're going to build a competitor to Amazon, and we're kind of hoping to catch some traffic from people mistyping Amazon. So we're going to call it Amazon. And our Amazon bookstore is going to have categories of books, and in each category we're going to have a bunch of books that we can choose from, and that sort of thing. Okay, so our data model for this Amazon bookstore, or Amazon, excuse me, is really pretty simple. We've got a category class which has a name and some images. We got a book class which has the category it's from, price, name, and then you can see there's this relationship here. Books can have comments, so users will be able to comment on their books and sort of the review section, and we'll also let people vote on the comments as well. Sort of the, hey, I found this one useful, that comment wasn't so useful. Okay, this could be any sort of database. It turns out the database we're using for our example is MongoDB, which is a NoSQL database, but I don't know that you'll be able to distinguish it from Entity Framework in the examples, because we're not going to look at the details, but I'm happy to answer questions on it as well if you want. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is just sort of building basic forms in MVC, and like I said, we're building up and up and up from there. Now, we could just go type all the HTML into the browser. We could just go and type, let me pull up Notepad really quick. We could just go type, form action equals edit, whatever, right? Method equals post, input, type equals text, and so on, right? We could go and type this type of form, but it turns out a lot of the cool features that I was telling you about, to some degree model binding, the unobtrusive validation, client-side, server-side validation, all those types of things work a lot better if we use these HTML helpers and we have to type less. So if we're doing model binding, which is usually a better way to do it, the combination of these HTML helpers and model binding is the way to go. All right, so let's go over to our application here. So here's Visual Studio 11. Takes a while to get used to the gray, but once you're used to it, it all makes plenty, it seems fine, but it does sort of seem shocking at first. So anyway, we're going to go and let me just run the website for a second, show you what it looks like here. So here's our bookstore. It already has some books and things that I put in here and some categories. All right, I can go into the mobile dev section, and here's some iPhone development books that we could look at. Right? We could view the details of them and so on. Right? But what we'd really like to do is be able to edit this data and add some more books. So there's this little admin tab down here. You'll see that doesn't do too much. In fact, once I have the ability to add books and categories, but if I try to go there, it just says, hey, these sections don't exist. So the first thing we're going to do for our Amazon bookstore is we're going to build out the ability to add categories. Turns out that's sort of a prerequisite to adding books. And then we're going to add books. Okay. So let's go back to Visual Studio here and look at our project. So we have controllers, 3 controllers, the home controller, one that shows us the details for books and lets us review books. And then there's this admin section. Now the admin section is basically empty, but let me go ahead and open that up for you guys here. Give you a little more room. Okay, so over here we've got this repository which lets us access the database, and we've got just 2 basic things we need to do. We want to add books and we want to add categories. So like I said, adding categories, it turns out to be a little bit simpler. So let me just steal this and we'll just call this add category. Okay, now remember, this typically follows this get, post, redirect pattern. So our first one is going to be HTTP get, right? And the job of this method is just to show the form. And sometimes this can be the entire implementation. If there's no extra data you need to send down. In the book example, we're going to need to start out with a list of categories that we can put into like a drop-down combo box type thing. So the get version will be less simple, but I think this actually might do it. Okay, so let's go over here and add a view. Do I already have a view? If I do, I don't want it. Let's see, do we have a view? Admin. Yes, we don't want those, sorry. Okay, so the reason I knew there was a view is ReSharper wasn't coloring it red, right? Now it's pretty clear. Whoops, something's wrong. So you can right click here. This is an important part of the way that all these forms and stuff work in MVC. So you right click there and you say add view. Now we can say I want a strongly typed view, which is usually what you want for these types of things. And let's just start out by saying, well, what I want is I want a category. So we've got a data layer library in there. It's called amazon.core.models, and in there we have a category class. Okay, and we'll just say create, use the same look and feel, the same master page, but if we leave it empty, it'll just pick up the defaults. That's what we want. Now they do have this concept of scaffolding in MVC, which you might use sometimes, but for our example, we won't. In our example, it's really about how do we build these things up. So we're going to start with an empty one, but it's very likely that you might choose create here, right? Now, rarely do you want to reference the script libraries. Usually you put that into your master page or your layout, depending on what you want to think of it as. Okay, so here we've got this this razor form, and it's strongly typed against a category. Now, it turns out that we probably won't keep using these data models directly out of the database, directly out of MongoDB for reasons we'll get into in just a little bit. But let's just go and create a form here. So like I said, it typically starts with these HTML helpers. And so we'd say using, that indicates a code block in Razor. And we'll say HTML.begin form. Okay. Most of the time, you can just say open close, and that's the that's fine. You can pass parameters to pass extra route data and whatnot. And this whole construct here on these 3 lines actually maps to form, with action equals whatever the URL is, and those kinds of things. So that's that part. And then in here we want to put the various pieces that we're working with. So let's go ahead and put this whole form inside of a div, and let's create a few divs here. Let's say div, this part will be a category name over here, and then let's put an input. So I could type input again, but what I'd rather do is make sure that whatever I type here sort of ties back to my models, and that way I'm guaranteed when I do a post back it'll actually map to the fields. And on top of that, when we add validation, the validation sort of comes from the properties. So instead of typing in input type equals text, what I'll type is at html.textbox4. And what it takes, if you haven't seen this before, it's kind of funky. What it takes is it takes a model, and because our model is a category, it takes a category. And we're going to say what property we want. Well, this is going to be name. Okay. And that's all good. Actually, let's put that inside of a div as well. It's probably just as good to do it like this. Okay. And what else do we need from our object? I think that might be it. Oh, we also need an image URL. That's right. So just to keep it interesting, we're going to let you paste in a URL that will be used as the display image. In a real system, you'd have like a CMS and you'd upload it or something. But in this world, we don't have that. So we're just going to say this lets us just type in the URL. And then last thing to do is we're going to need a button to save these changes. All right. Now there is no @html.button for besides this radio button thing, which is not what we want. So we have to either type, or if you guys are still new to this, you can go over here and just double click submit and throw that in there as well. Right? Doesn't need an ID. We'll make the text something like create category. Okay, and that should actually do it. We should be able to run this, go back to our admin section, and view the admin bit for add category. Whoops, I guess it hasn't finished going yet here. Hold on. There we go. Wait. Okay, so that's pretty nice. Well, it doesn't look nice, but it's not too bad, right? We've got a category, and we've got an image URL. There's 2 problems. One, it's kind of ugly. Maybe we could fix that, but the bigger problem, and we'll come back and address the ugly aspect, because I think that is important to have good looking sites. But if I click this, it'll say resource not found, and it's going to admin/add category. So that's the admin controller, the method called add category. If we switch back there, you might think, well, here's add category in the admin controller, but because there's a get on the top, all we can do is make get requests, and a post is basically like, well, there's nothing that's called add category and handles posts. So 404 is what it says. All right, so we're going to add the second one, a hoist. Oh, I do. Okay, great. Let me look here. Sorry, I got to expand this, guys, just a second. Okay. Can I increase my voice? I will give it a try. Will this webcast be available offline? Yes, it will definitely be available offline. We're recording it now, and it'll be available in a couple of days, maybe earlier. Okay, and I'll try to talk louder. I know it's kind of coming in quiet for some reason. Maybe I can adjust it over here in my recording. And now that's pretty much maximum volume. Sorry, I'll just try to speak louder for you guys. Okay. Thanks, Mary. Let me know if there's more questions. And if that didn't answer your question, then just send out another chat. Okay, so we've got, like I said, this get version and this post version. And notice there's obviously a naming clash here because the signature, these 2 methods are identical. So typically what you do when you have these post versions is you have some sort of object that you're binding to. This is the model binding concept. So because our view was strongly typed to category, we're going to just take a category here. All right. And that solves both the name resolution in C#, but also how we get our values back. So rather than trying to pull values out of a form, we just grab them, we let MVC look at the names of all the properties in the form and copy them to the properties with the corresponding names. And because we use the HTML helpers, right, those things are always in sync. So what we want to do is we want to first almost always ask this question: if not model state is valid. If that's not the case, we want to return view of category. All right, so if there's some sort of validation and there's a problem with like a required field is missing or something, we want to just show the form back to the user. Now, it's possible that you would never run this on certain browsers with the right settings because you'll have client-side validation, but you still need to run the validation on the server as well. Okay, so we want to do that. And then otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to say repository dot save category. And then, so not a whole lot going on there. We're going to create a new category. It's going to have the right properties. This save basically does a attach and insert into the database. Category has a primary key, but it's auto-generated by the database. So the only other two fields are image URL and name. So we'll just go with that. That should do everything. And then instead of showing the form again, we want to actually take them back to maybe view the books in the categories, or maybe go home so they can see that the category's there, or go back to the admin section. You guys have to decide what makes sense for that. But wherever you want them to go, you always have this method called redirect, and you just give it a URL, or you can say redirect to action if you want to leverage the routing and give you a little more flexibility there. For ours, we'll just say, go home. Okay. So let's go ahead and try this again. Oh, I see there's a question blinking here. Let me look. Was there a reason I chose not to use scaffolding? Yes. The reason I chose not to use scaffolding really is because this is an example. The whole point of this exercise is to just show you sort of all the pieces of the form. And if I use scaffolding, you get all these weird looking lambdas that the first time you see them, you're like, whoa, this is crazy. Where'd all this stuff come from? I just want you guys to understand two things. One, where it comes from, and the second one is that it's not really that big of a deal. I mean, if we look at the view, right, that's not a lot of crazy input there, and it just gives us a little more control over the HTML. But yeah, mostly I chose not to do it because we want to sort of start from scratch in the example. In a real project, I would probably let the scaffolding generate this and then edit it back out. It just makes it a little quicker, especially if you've got more than just two fields. So great question. All right, so let's see if this works. So if I go over here, notice there's a JavaScript and a mobile category. So let's click here to admin Amazon, and we'll go over here and we'll add a category. And if we've done everything right, let's say physics, if I can spell physics. And now for our image URL, we're gonna have to find some fun thing. So let's say physics lolcat. So let's try to find an interesting, funny picture. There we go. Let's just copy this picture and say, whoops, not open image in a new tab, but copy the URL. Okay, so let's use that as our picture. Obviously, you'd have a real one. So hopefully everything goes right here. Let's click category. It'll go run the post method. The post method will make sure that all the rules or requirements are validated on the object. Turns out there's no requirement, so that's always going to pass, but later we'll add some. And then it's going to insert into the database and redirect us back to the home page, so we should see 3 categories if this all works. Bam, there we go. How about that? So we've got this new category now that we just created, and obviously there's no books in it, but it does have a cool lolcat picture, which is always a plus. So let's go ahead and admin Amazon again, and now let's teach it the ability to add books. So what we want to do is add a book to our category. Now it turns out this form is somewhat more complicated because it's not just pure input. We've got to sort of generate some data, and we've got to make sure that the book is added to a category that already exists, those kinds of things. So we'll see there's 2 ways to do this. We'll start out with kind of a naive way of doing it, and we'll see that there's ways to improve on it. So we're going to do it not wrong, but we're going to do it less good, and then we'll do it better. So let's go build this add book method over here in our admin controller. Now it's going to look a whole lot like this one, so let me copy that for a second here. And let's just say, we'll call this add book. And let's go ahead and add a view. And this again is going to be strongly typed. We again do not want to reference those things, but this is going to be book. We have a book class. Okay, so we're going to say create a strongly typed view with book, and we'll call it add book. Let's go ahead and give those spaces. So we'll go down here. Let's create another form. So at using HTML helper, begin form. Okay, and then throw it inside a div just in case we want to style it or something. And again, we're going to only have like one more field here. So we'll say div name, or maybe title. It's slightly more appropriate for book. We'll say at html.textbox4. Since this is just a one-liner, we'll say textbox4. But if we wanted like some kind of discussion area or like more rich text, we might say text area 4. Right? And again, model goes to, and you just use this lambda to select the property. So this will be name. Right? And then let's do this again. Here we'll say image URL, copy, image URL, and then the last one is price. Okay. In dollars. Okay. And then like before, we need a submit button. Input type equals submit, value equals add book, something like that. Okay. Perfect. Now again, this is not going to look super good. We can come back to that, but it should let us at least do this. Now there's one other thing though that's important here is our model has a category ID, and this is kind of like the foreign key constraint that will reference the category that the book belongs to. And so I need them to select that, but if you should look at that. But if you actually see what the value for that is, it's like a GUID. It's really big, it's really ugly, and we don't want to show, even if we're an integer, we don't want to show number to people. We want to show the name of the category. But there's nothing I can do with the book to say, hey, give me a list of categories, right? The book is sort of independent of categories other than this ID that it has there. So what we need to do is we need to pass extra data. There's two ways to do this. We could keep this way working that we have right here with book, with our models, our database models, our entity models. We could keep this working by using this thing called a view bag. Now, view bag is a little bit weird if you're not used to it, but what it is a dynamic object, and underneath it, it's really just like a dictionary of key values. So what, like for example, this line right here does is it's equivalent of saying view data of title equals add book. Okay. But typically in MVC we use view bag. It's just a little bit cleaner. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually add some categories in the controller to this view bag that lets us pass through sort of another channel besides the model, pass data on here. So we're going to say, we'll be able to say something like this. We'll say category, actually I want to say select list item array. All right. Whoops, if I gave it, say, well, what do we call this? We'll call it categories equals view data dot categories list. Now, you might want to just pass the actual categories as objects out of your database, but you'll see that it's a lot simpler if you use this concept of a select list. And this is one of the things that people always get stuck on in MVC. I see there's a question. Let me address that really quick before we go on. Can you mix Razor views with with CSHTML Razor views with ASPX views? You guys have built a significant app on top of ASPX, and you like to leverage those assets. Yeah, absolutely. You can completely add different types of views and use them even in the same project in parallel. So, like when I go add here, if I can get the thing to come up, I can choose different view, what are called different view engines, and so there's your ASPX ones. You could even use other ones. There's a third-party open source type view engines as well. Yeah, so definitely. Okay, So I could just pass the categories, but you'll see that it's a lot simpler here. So let's say the first thing we're going to do actually in the form is say category. Now remember that we had this add book, and really the add book needed extra data. So what we would do is we would go down here to the add book view, and I guess those crashed. That's fine. No worries. Let's do it again. We said we want a select list item array. This part is super important, you guys. A lot of people run into issues with this. It gets a little tricky. So we'll have a select list item array, and we're going to call this categories equals view bag dot categories list is what we called it. All right, now I just made this up. Obviously, view bag doesn't have a thing called categories list, but this is just a dynamic object that lets us put whatever we want. So let me just copy and paste this over here. So know that we need to have view bag dot categories list equals, I'll just say null for now, but we'll put something in there in a second. Okay. And then what we need to do is say I'm going to have a category in here, and we'll say this is going to be a drop-down list. We give it a name. We'll call it selected category. And we unpin this so we got some room. And it's going to take our categories. Okay. So that will give us this drop-down list that'll be populated with whatever items we put in here. So let's go back to our thing and fill this out. So we can actually get the actual categories if we were to say repository.all categories. Okay. But remember, what this actually is those are the category objects, or an iQueryable category, technically speaking. And what we need is a select list. So we're going to use a little link statement and a projection to get this thing going. We'll say from in all categories, select new select list item, like this. And we're going to say text equals category dot name, value equals category dot underscore ID. And this is what's technically called an object ID from MongoDB, but it's like a GUID, so it really needs to be a string here. And then we could have it selected if we want. Okay. So we'll go ahead and just, for now, pass this extra data along. And we could also pass a book. We could say something like new book. If our book object had defaults, it wanted to maybe preload in there. Technically, that's sort of just what MVC does anyway, so it's fine. But that might be helpful here. So let's go ahead and run this again. Oh, and it's going to not work because one more thing we've got to do to recover from that crash is I have to go over here and say view local services and start up my database server again. So just a second. So go start MongoDB again. And just make sure that starts from scratch too. Okay. So should all work well and good. There we go. So back to Amazon with our categories. Let's go and try to add a book. Now remember, we can't technically add books, so we don't have the post part, but at least we have the category there. Maybe not. Let me do one quick change here. So this doesn't like the projection to a selected list item in the database, and I don't really blame it, so let's just say to array. Okay. Oops. Like that. Not that many categories anyway. Okay. So now everything should be good here in a moment. Cannot convert from object to selected list item. Oh yes, and this is a IEnumerable finally to array. I could have also just said that it took an IEnumerable on the other side. Sorry about that. Okay, final question. So we should be able to see these books here, and we'll have our category drop down, and then we have the 3 ones, even the physics one we just made. Okay, so then we select that. Now how do we get that back
into our post, right? Remember, these are always get, post, redirect sort of patterns. So let's go over here and copy this. And we're going to say, again, this time we're going to take a book. We also have to, because we passed this category, selected category in a separate channel, whatever, we're going to also have a string selected category. And that'll really be the selected category ID. Okay. So MVC will look in our form and say, well, here's a parameter called selected category. Do you have one of those? Because technically the book doesn't have it. Although, it just occurred to me, if I look at my book.category ID, I probably could just use this as well. So either way would work. So let's try this. Let's go over here and call this like that. I think that'll do, actually. Okay, so this is going to be the post version. We want to do a change. Of course, we want to say if not a model state that is valid. And we just want to return view of a book. Now this gets a little extra complicated because we also have to generate these categories. So let me turn this into a method. Otherwise, when it redisplays the page, it won't have the list to work with anymore. So let's just go over to ReSharper and say extract, refactor, extract method. Do the Control-R, Control-M, but either way. Method, this will be get categories. So categories list is fine. Okay. Oops. So we can just do it like this. So even over this one, if turns out we've got to show the page again, we've got to regenerate that list. That list is not kept around by MVC like it was in, say, web forms. Okay, and then so here we can say repository dot just save book again, and we'll say return redirect, and let's actually go like look at maybe the book. So let's say slash books show, and we'll say book dot underscore ID. And just like in any framework in MongoDB, right here at this step, we did not have a proper ID, but after we call save, that's updated with the kind of auto-generated ID. So this should be working just great. All right, so let's go ahead and add another book. And then we'll move over to sort of the final thing. So let's add some physics books here. And let's just go over to some random bookstore, who knows, and just find physics, just search for something there. Hopefully they fix my spelling. There we go. So here, let's put this book in here. Oops, and I need to do not that one. This one, say physics, new physics in its evolution. Let me copy its image. And how much does it cost? It costs $15.99. Okay. So let's go and add this book back. Ding. There you go. Now we've got our book, and we generate the form with a get. We did a post back to the server. If everything works good, then we just do a redirect over to the newly created thing. If it didn't, we would have seen the form again. Okay. So there's a few things that we need to add, though. One is if I don't put any price here, it doesn't care. It's just going to use 0 for the value, right? What I really need to do is say, hey, these properties are required, some of them, so please don't skip them. All right. So one thing you could do, and I don't really recommend it, is I could go to my data model and put attributes on my actual NV model classes. This is even more tricky in any framework because depending on how you generated them, it can regenerate them, and that causes trouble. There's ways around it, but it's better to just have classes that are sort of intended to be used for the views. So let's see if I can get my little thing you guys can't see, but there's a little GoToMeeting thing in the way. Okay, go over here, and let's actually add a folder called View Models. Now, yes, we have a thing called models up there, but I like to have a distinction between my domain models and the things that are meant to be views. So I'm going to add a thing called a book, a class called book view model. All right. And I'll show you guys a cool little trick here once this thing gets generated. So we can go over here and go back to our add book view. And we're just going to say this takes view models. Oh, whoops. Just post it up here and then import that namespace. We'll see that we won't necessarily have to do this select list if we didn't want to. But let's go over here and I can just say control period and tell it to generate these three properties that are required. Just for the sake of time, probably what I would do is put this property on the view model as well, but let's just not do that for now. Okay, so this is going to be a string. Interesting guess Visual Studio made there. And this can be a float. Okay. Oops. All right. So what this lets us do is this lets us add extra stuff to our model. We can come down here and we can say this field is required. I guess spell required like that. And that lives in system.componentModel.data annotations. I can say this is required, and guess what? So is that. I can also say one more required field is a object ID called category ID. Remember that was our foreign key constraint. So just making this simple change here and going over to our controller and saying this takes a book view model like so. Import that namespace over here, and in this one, let's just leave that alone. Okay. So over here, we say in our post it takes a book view model, and now because of those attributes, this model state is going to start doing its magic. Okay. And of course, we can't save book view models because they're not supported there. So I'll say book equals new book. And I can say book dot, start setting things equals, call this, that's probably not the best name, so let's call this view model, like so. Dot category ID, book dot name equals view model dot name, book dot price equals view model dot price, and then last one dot image equals. Now, if you were really doing this, you would probably use something called AutoMapper, but in our simple example, in fact, we don't have much time left. We'll just go with this. Okay. All right. So let me go and show you something here. Let's go back and try to create another book. Let's say we're going to add, let's call it second edition. All right, suppose we're going to try to add that, and we don't put a price in here. If I hit add book, it's still going to do the same post back. But now, over in Visual Studio, I go up a little bit, it's going to see, it's going to ask the view model, hey, are all your required properties and other types of requirements you might have met? And of course, it should not have one. Oh, it may for the float. So let me take this out as well. Okay. So if I say add book, it's going to come back and say, no, these are required. You've got to put something here. So if I type, you can see it still stays red. I can put something here. And if we actually look at the Chrome developer tools at the network settings over here, let's do like this. If I hit this, you should see it's actually making requests, making requests. Okay? So that's all well and good. But what we'd like to do is enable client-side validation as well. So it turns out the same attributes here make it really easy for client-side validation as well. In fact, all you got to do is include the right JavaScript libraries. So if we go down, you got to double check just to make sure that your system is set up right. You've got this bit in your web config. That comes out by default, so unless you took it out or you upgraded an old app or something, you don't have to worry about that. So the next thing you do is you go over to your script libraries. You find your master page or your layout, which is under shared layout. You say to do jQuery validate below. Make sure it's happening below. This little GoToMeeting thing pops in my way. below jQuery because it depends upon that. And then we also want that one. We don't want HTTP. I just want to say go to the... All right, so just making that change, actually I don't need to recompile it. I could have just saved it. Lets me go over here. I do need to reload some of these pages. Let's see what this one will do. Let's reload this one, and let's just say go back to our developer tools. Say clear. Oops. Here we go. So the first request you'll see comes in, does a request just like that. But if I clear it out, just click the right thing, I hit this, you'll see there's no postback, there's no talking to the server, but I still get these red areas. It says, hey, this is required, so let's go for the title. And let's go and pick one of these, right? You see as I type, if I type something here like $4.99 and tab away, the red goes away automatically. It's all client side. And then click it. Off it goes. Oh, really wants one of these selected. Yeah, that little trick I did wasn't working so well. But anyway, just for the sake of time, I'll keep going. Right? Really what we need to do is, I guess I can go back and do it like this. Pretty simple. So now I need to do drop-down list 4, and instead of saying category ID, I say model goes to model.category ID. Okay, that's really what you do once you have this on your view model. Okay, and this we're not using anymore. Yeah, we are using this, I guess. Okay, so let's see what I do. Show we're fine. No. It's possible that because it's the type of object that it is, it doesn't really like it since it's this funky. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. It's this funky thing here. So I guess I have to just take that required thing off and just check it on the server, but that's okay. All right. Any questions on this? We'll move on. And I know we're just about to run over in time, but if you guys give me about 10 minutes, I'll show you some pretty cool stuff. And if you got to go, no problem, I understand. Okay, so yeah, it doesn't look like there's any questions. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is show you something sort of beyond this, hey, here's just HTML helpers and postback and the get post redirect pattern. Well, those are all necessary building blocks. We can do better. Like if we're over here in, say, my Google Apps version of the slides here, you know, every interaction doesn't generate a post back to the server and run server code, right? Most of the time it's running stuff on the client, maybe calling JavaScript services. So let's go and look at another part of our site here that's already existing. Let's go look at like over here. Well, let's go in this part. Okay. No books. I need some of the books. Okay. So let's go to this book then. All right. So we can add reviews here. There's a couple of things I don't like, but we can say, Michael, this is my first comment. Hope you like it. And when I click comment, it's going to do a post back to the server, refresh the page, and then if I happen to scroll back down, oh, hey, there's a comment. Hope you like it. And then I can vote. It turns out the voting doesn't even do anything, but you know, if we kept going with this way, like every time you vote, it would post back to the server, all sorts of weird things like that happening. So what I'd like to do is make this a little bit cleaner, maybe hide this form, like when the form first shows, and then have this stuff all happen, you know, client side. Okay, so we can do that pretty easily in just a few minutes here. Now, here's my scripts folder, so we're going to do some JavaScript. But typically I don't like to put my JavaScript in that scripts folder because NuGet manages all these files here, and maybe more if I add more libraries, and I don't want that like cluttering up the 1 or 2 JavaScript files I'm going to have. So let me go over here and add a new folder, just called JS. Into the JS folder, I'm just going to add something called site.js. Okay, now I would like IntelliSense, but I don't really get it right now if I type, you know, jQuery type stuff. So let's add IntelliSense to this file here, and you do that by going to your scripts folder, which of course I went right past. Go to your scripts folder and you grab the VS-Doc version and you put it up here like this and let it go. So that adds a JavaScript reference. It has no runtime significance, but it does help when I type this. I get a whole lot more nice stuff. Okay. The other thing that you should probably be doing is you should be using namespaces so your objects are, more discoverable, self-contained, all that kind of stuff. So let's say var Amazon equals that. So JavaScript namespaces are really just objects that contain other objects. So here's like an empty object. And that lets us write some methods. So I can say Amazon dot expand comment area equals a function which takes no parameters. Okay. I'm going to need that function. And we're going to have one that says vote. Let's call it register voting or something like that. Okay. Now, of course, we don't want to run these straight away as the JavaScript file loads. We want to wait until our document is in the DOM and ready to go. So we'll say document.ready function and take it like that, and then we'll just call these functions here. Get nice IntelliSense, right? You can see register voting, expand common area, that kind of stuff. Okay, so this one is going to be super easy. Let's go look over at our book view. Books, not add book, but just simply our book show. So it should be show.cshtml. There's this section over here where we can add our comment, and I called it comment form. Okay. So let's say that this thing is actually hidden. You can probably put this in CSS, but just for now, display :none. So it starts out hidden, and then we'll show it. And let's add this thing here. Oops. Let's have a div, or actually href equals hash ID equals add comment. I'll just say add comment. So we'll do this. And initially, this thing is going to be collapsed, but then when you click on this link, it's going to fade that section in. Okay, so you don't have this big form always here if you just want to read. It only shows it to you if you add a comment. Okay, so let's go back to our JavaScript file, and we'll say, find me the thing with the ID add comment. Oops. And the other thing I'm going to need to know about is its friend here, comment form. Okay. And when somebody clicks on that, I'm going to give it a function, give it a parameter called e. We're going to say when that happens, click on, say this dot siblings. I guess there's only one thing, so we don't need to do that. We'll say find the thing called comment form and dot fade in slow, just for an effect, just so you guys can see it over the shared screen. But we also don't want the click to actually reload the page ending. So we'll say e prevent default, return false. Okay. All right, so let's just see that that works really quick. And then the last thing to do is just do a little bit of JavaScript to actually handle the voting. So let's go look at this here. Now you see the review section is hidden. Maybe the add comment should be above the reviews. I'm not really sure. But if I click this, so it didn't work. There's one thing that I completely forgot here, and that is to actually include the JavaScript in my layout. Right? So we're not actually running the JavaScript, so let's do that really quick. Let's just put that right there. Obviously, that's a requirement. So let's go over here and just reload that page. Okay, now if I say add comment, you can see that event handler fires just expands out. So that's really nice. The other thing we'd like to do is be able to vote. So if we go look at the voting section, I already have that a little bit in place just from the HTML. Votes, this is a partial view. And we're using another trick here that lets the Razor view stash some data on the form that JavaScript can grab later. See all these things with data dash username, data dash vote val. data-book, which is the ID of the book. So those are things the JavaScript library is going to need to know. It needs to know to vote on a comment by a user and associated with a particular book, and is it a vote up or is it a vote down? Okay. So I'm going to just hook the event handler for things with the class vote. If somebody clicks it, I'm going to pull those three things off and I'm going to pass it to the server. Say, do that vote. Okay. So let's go over here and say, in the register voting, we'll say this. We'll say $, dot for class. Whoops. Vote is what it was, I guess. Click. Click Q, new line, click. Function, E. Let's close it off. Now, when somebody clicks on this, I need to grab some data. So let's say var data equals, we're going to do what's called an object literal here. We'll say vote val colon, and I need to grab that information off. So I can say, well, what was it that was clicked? And in JavaScript, that's always this, when you have that, at least in jQuery. And I can say data, and give me the thing called, let me make sure I know what it is. It's just called vote val lowercase. So when you do these data dash, you don't actually include the data bit. Okay? So there's the vote value, comma, and then book ID. Let's see, what is our book? It's just called book over here, okay? And then the last one is going to be username. This will be username, okay? So here's the data that we're going to grab. And what I want to do is I want to pass this up to the server. And let's also say var number area. So if you remember what this looks like, there's this 4 and this 2 and this 1. I want to be able to work with that. So let's say this is equal to $ this. Here's where I was thinking I had too much siblings of thing called. So go find the thing next to either upvote or downvote called vote count and grab that. Okay. So we're going to need to post this to somewhere on the server. Let's just say we'll create a URL called /books/vote. Okay, that's where we're going to post to. Then we can just say this post with jQuery. Super easy. We say post to that URL, that piece of data, and we want to give it a function like so. E. And we'll also say error. This takes another function. Error, or just E as well, I guess we'll probably do. Maybe not, E2. We'll just say alert error, something like that, okay? So here's where, it'll return to if everything is successful. And I guess this will be, let's call that result. Okay, so what I want to do is in the result on the server, we're actually going to say the value of the current votes is something. So what I want to do is say number area dot HTML is that dot vote count. Okay, and if we did everything right, hopefully we did, everything we'll be able to just create a method called vote with these 3 parameters and call it through JavaScript. Okay, so let's find out. We're going to go back to our books controller. Just want to take a few more minutes since I know we're running over. And let's just go over here and create an action result. So public action results vote. And it's going to take those 3 parameters. It's going to take an integer, oops, there, an integer, a vote val. It's going to take a string called book ID. And it's going to take a string called username. Okay, so then what we're going to return in the end is we're going to say just JSON. And we're just going to make up a new object that has the properties we want to pass back. Since JSON is untyped, so is this. That's fine. We say vote count. Let's just say for now equals 0, but we're going to add something back. We'll add that in there. Okay. So what I need to do is I need to find the book. So let's say book book equals repository.findBook. New object ID, book ID. That'll do the conversion from string to object ID. And I guess if book is null, we probably should do this. Return HTTP not found. Right. So if they gave us like the wrong URL or something. And then what I need to do is say var comment equals from C in book.comments, where C dot username is username. Select C. And on top of that, I could do just a single. I guess I could have just done that as a lambda as well, but you know, it is what it is. Okay, so once I have that, I can say comment. Now comment has a vote thing. I can say add vote value. And at least it just takes like 1, 1, minus 1, 1, minus 1, and so on. And then here, the last thing I want to do is I'll say int count equals comments.votes.sum. V goes to V. All right, really simple thing there. And then we'll say count. Okay, anybody have any questions? Right, just like we have model binding for with our parameters here when we are posting from the web, also when we do a post from jQuery, same type of thing, okay? So let's go and see if this works. Now when you do JavaScript, you always have to make sure you've got the latest version, and these browsers are super aggressive at caching it, so just pull that up, make sure you got it. Okay, that looks good. Let's go over here and look at this guy. Let's see, we've got some votes here. Let's see if we can vote on this. So if I click on it, look at that, 2, 3. Oh, I think I might have something a little bit wrong here in my thing here. Let's see. Oh, yes, of course. So, just to make it clear, here's a post action. We're trying to change our data, which I am doing, but of course I forgot to say repository.saveBook. Whoops. So, save vote. So if you don't save the vote, there's not a whole lot I can do about it. It's just going to go up or down. Okay, so let's try this some more. Voting up. Give it a second. Make sure it's all reloaded okay. There we go. So let's try to vote up, up, up. Put this one down. Oh, whoops. There's no username there. Okay, why not Objective-C? All right, pretty cool, right? And there's obviously no refreshing of the page. It just goes back and posts to the server. All right, if you want to be a little more specific, you can go over here to the scripts. Whoops, pull up your script. You can actually set a breakpoint here, a breakpoint here, and we could set a breakpoint here. Last thing. And debug this guy. Give it a second. Okay. So, whoops, don't really want to check my email. Switch over to this one. Okay. Come on. So if I throw this one up, first it hits the client-side breakpoint. Step along here. It's going to do the post. Tell that to run. It's going to come over here. You can see the vote value is 1. The book ID is that. Right, so we come along, make our changes, go back over here. Our result object. So we go look at that. Quick watch result. It's got its vote count of 6, so it's going to set that area to 6. Off it goes. Now our vote is 6. All right, guys. Wish I could have followed along the slides a little bit more for you so you have some reference, but with the computer crashing, it kind of wrecked our time. So I'll send those out for you, though, on Twitter. And if you have any questions, yeah, I see a few coming in, so please let me know. All right, so yeah, there's a couple of questions here. Let me answer them. Yeah, sorry, Greg, I totally froze up. My computer died. Okay, I see you're using Visual Studio 2011. Is it different from Visual Studio 2010 with MVC? Yeah, it is better, largely just because the web editing is better. So, for example, if I go over to my CSS files, this ReSharper search, you get a little bit nicer stuff there. It's not really significantly different, other than you could create MVC4 stuff as well. But it's just Visual Studio itself is a little bit nicer. For example, I'm over here. I could search for everything that has user in it, right? And that would do a search across my solution. You don't get that unless you have some power tools for Visual Studio. So it's not that the MVC aspects are really that much better. It's just mostly that Visual Studio has a lot of improvements. My hard drive's slow. Eventually that'll come up with a bunch of stuff there. Okay, let's see. Great details so far. Appreciate it. Starting without scaffolding. Yeah, you're welcome. One-to-many. Okay, so how do you do one-to-many and many-to-many relationships in MVC forms? Well, that is a great question. So let me see if I can answer it with an example that we have so far. Okay, that's not finding anything apparently. So let's go over to Add Book. So over here, we've got our drop-down. If we wanted to have this book in multiple categories, we could just do like a select list that's not actually a drop-down, but lets you do a multi-select, and then you would have on the server side, you'd have it bound to an array of integer IDs or something like that, rather than just individual ones. Okay, so that's how you would do that. For many-to-many, I guess you just do that in both forms, depending on which direction you're looking at. Yeah, I'm not really sure how else to show that. Yeah, Chris, Polly, yes, we're absolutely posting and recording this, and we'll be out there. Am I aware of single-page apps Signal R item template for CRUD? For CRUD, yes, I am. That's some really neat stuff. And that reminds me about single-page apps. Let me go ahead and just say something about the single-page apps, even though... All right, so like I said, I'll post these slides for you, but single-page apps are really, really interesting. If you like WPF and MVVM, then you'll probably really like single-page apps. They're quite amazing. They even work offline, very cool, and so they sort of build on that jQuery stuff we were doing to some degree. So what I recommend is you check out this talk by Steve Sanderson, works at Microsoft. Really, really good talk. It's only a few days old, like a month old. Highly recommend it. It's at bit.ly/Sanderson-SPA for single-page apps. So yeah, check that out, and obviously that'll be in the stuff we hand out later as well. Really good demo. Thanks. Hopefully, yeah. I'm sorry about the problems, but I know every now and then that does sort of help you guys figure out how to deal with them yourself. Other than the blue screen and the broken hard drive, that is helpful to no one. Siva, yeah, you're welcome. You're definitely welcome. Thanks for coming. So that's the end of the question backlog. If anybody has more questions, please send them out here. Otherwise, I'll post the little app that I built. You'll need MongoDB to run it, but MongoDB is like unzip a file and type go. I'll put instructions in there for how to run it. It's super easy. And then I'll post that as materials. Even though I was doing it in Visual Studio 11, Visual Studio 11 is finally the first Visual Studio that actually doesn't totally change the Visual Studio projects to make them incompatible. So you guys will be able to do that in Visual Studio 2010. You'll be able to open those without the new one. And then we're recording this. We'll turn it into a video you guys can download. We'll post it on develop.com, and I'll send it out on Twitter. So unless I see any more questions, thanks for the time, and thank you for the patience with my crashing computer. I see somebody is raising their hand. Let me see about that here. Nicole, you got a question? Yeah, excellent. Okay. Oh yeah, so what goes into making the decision between Entity Framework, Link, or is it just personal preferences? And you're welcome, Andrew. Yeah, he said thanks. So there's a big trend in the whole industry towards sort of more code-focused database programming. And if you're a DBA, you probably don't like that so much. But typically people are doing Entity Framework. They don't always do MongoDB or some other NoSQL thing, but there's plenty of NoSQL stuff going on. But either one of those you choose, it turns out that there's this trend towards sort of schemaless, not schemaless, but more dynamic type of schema. So with Entity Framework, the way Microsoft is starting to recommend that you use Entity Framework is through the code-first model. You just come up with your classes, and as you start to interact with them, that generates tables, right? And MongoDB has been doing that for a while, and I sort of like them both for that reason. So to some degree, it's just a preference, but there's a whole bunch of reasons to go into NoSQL versus SQL that are probably not worth going into. So yeah, I would say I agree with Nicole that you would see a lot more apps using the new framework, but at the same time, I don't think you'll see a difference in the controller code that we wrote over here, right? It's all still just, if I can find the right files, like over here in the admin controller, it's all still just, repository link type stuff. Okay, any other questions? Let's see here. Questions. Here we go. That bigger again, sorry. All right, that looks like that's all the questions, you guys. So unless you have anything else, thanks. And here, let me leave you with this last final thought. We've got lots of good stuff at Developmentor talking about MVC, jQuery, MongoDB, all those different types of things. So feel free to look us up. And again, thanks for your time.